Welcome to the Differential podcast. My name is Shahbano, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tyler.
Hello.
And we're here with our guest, Richard Lackey.
Hello.
Richard is the CIO of National Healthcare Solutions. He's an engineer by trade. He's been a founder of his own startup. He's been a CIO at other companies in the space. And he's one of those really special people who are both technically competent and can actually talk about the business side really well. So very excited to have you here, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you.
So let's dive right into it. Do you think AI will replace your job?
I do not. I do not think that AI will replace all aspects of my job. I think that AI, at least in its current state, is an excellent way to get a B- on a paper. But if you want an A+, you're going to have to put a little bit more effort. That doesn't mean that there's components of what I do that will be replaced by AI, and rightfully so. I'd rather be able to focus on that 20% that has that additional value than that 80% that can be replaced. So I'm actually looking forward to that.
It was a half joke question just to throw you off, but when somebody asks me that, I'm like, please replace my job. I would love nothing more.
Exactly. Like there's so much about what we do, or at least what I do, that absolutely I would love for to be able to give it to either a technology or staff, but I can't hire enough staff to do the things that I don't like doing. So we'll see how it goes.
So AI has been around for a long time. We're constantly interacting with AI on a daily basis. I used my face to open my phone like 50 times today. That was a computer vision algorithm. The automatic steering in your car, even the audio for our podcast is going to be processed through an AI tool. And it's a lot to keep up with. How important do you think it is to keep up with these trends for you, for your staff, for the leadership at your company? And then how do you keep up?
Specifically to AI, it is critical for everybody on my team to embrace AI as another tool set to do their job. You know, I learned programming at a time prior to the internet, and I used to carry huge COBOL volumes for reference. And at some time, there's this thing came along called Google that actually made me, who admittedly, I'm pretty good at databases. I'd say even above average. But with Google, I was brilliant. And that's where, if you didn't embrace that, that change in that ability to get information, you weren't going to be competitive with your peers. AI has that same effect on everybody in my company, as far as I'm concerned. It should be a tool that they're using on a daily basis to help improve whatever that they're trying to do. Right now, it's really focused around communications, making sure that we're communicating effectively and that we're articulating and saying what we want to do concisely. And especially my team, where I have a mix of onshore, offshore, absolutely we use AI for helping us come up with that ability to make sure that we're saying the same thing. Now, how do I keep up on general trends?
Yeah.
The trick there is surrounding yourself with people smarter than yourself, right? So,
Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about data. This year, it was a platform shift in tech with generative AI. That's what a lot of people are calling it. They're using that word, platform shift. And I think the other times there were a platform shift, it was like you mentioned, when the internet came out, huge deal. When mobile phones came out, huge deal, because it enabled the App Store, and these huge businesses like Uber could now exist, Airbnb. And generative AI is supposed to be this next platform shift. And I think it's really interesting because when you think of generative AI, you think of ChatGPT, like you think of large language models specifically, even though that's part of the landscape. It's not the whole landscape. And so Tyler and I, we were actually looking at startups from Y Combinator's Alumni Demo Day. Y Combinator is this VC firm out in Silicon Valley. They're funding all these AI startups. So it gives you a glimpse into what companies are working on, where they're kind of like on the edge in the forefront. And it seemed like a lot of the AI companies fall into these three categories. The first is like assistants or co-pilots. Then there are all these creative tools. So this is like dev tools like GitHub's Copilot, design tools like Midjourney to generate images. Then there's another category, and this is a really interesting category, and I want to get your take on it. The last category is automation, which has always been a thing. Like automation is tied to operational efficiency. You want people to be more efficient, we automate the parts that a computer can take care of. But what's interesting is when you used to write automations for operational efficiency, you would use like an ETL tool, like you would build out a data pipeline. You'd have a company where each department has its own data, it's siloed, and you would try to put a system in place to combine and clean that data and present it in like some kind of report. What's interesting with generative AI is one of the capabilities that it's enabled is the mass and speedy processing of data that wasn't possible before. And that hasn't reached common understanding in the business world yet, but that's kind of what you see with startups. There are all these startup companies that are now taking automation tasks that you would take months to set up an ETL with and doing them in minutes because the pre-trained transformer can process all this data really, really quickly. So there is some kind of revolution coming for the enterprise world, specifically in the realm of data, which I know is your background. You worked at EDS, you're on the database side. So that's coming. And I think that's actually really exciting and interesting. And I want to get your take on how big is that problem still at big companies? Like, how big is the problem of data silos? And do you think it will really be a revolution for business once those generative tools are in place?
It is a huge problem, not just for a business, but for the ecosystem that's trying to serve a patient in healthcare.
Okay.
So let's just take the healthcare environment as a sample, right? I'm a patient and I'm going to have to get a treatment. Well, how many different players are going to interact with that transaction? I'm going to have a doctor that does a diagnosis, and there may be a specialist to do a deeper diagnosis, and then there may be some type of intervention that's either pharmaceutical or surgical or perhaps even both. Then there might be a follow-up with a physical therapist or some type of therapy to make sure that whatever course of action that was taken was actually being enforced and is now going to cure that patient. And each of those different touch points is going to generate a transaction for billing purposes, and there may be an insurance company that needs to pay that. There's a whole context of things, and all I'm talking about is somebody that may have, a knee surgery that they need to take care of.
How is that dealt with now?
Fragmentation runs amok.
Okay.
But National Healthcare Solutions, as a administrative services, sees a lot of those transactions. So we see the billing side of all that. It's a very, very huge problem, not just for any one company, but for certainly in healthcare. This is without a doubt one of our largest challenges. And then you have laws that really kind of want to enforce these silos. So it makes it even more challenging. In my heart, like all of this should be going into a common pool of data. There should be a master data model that's being generated. And I think AI is the only way that we're going to be able to make sense of it all, because no one party is large enough to invest on their own. When IBM Watson first hit the scene in healthcare, I think that this was kind of their vision. They wanted to be that platform to help transform this problem. So maybe they were there too soon. So I'm interested to see how this proceeds. I think that there's a solution, but I'm also of an age where there is no technical solution to hard problems. Hard problems actually require hard work. There is no panacea. There's nothing coming to save us. I'm hopeful, but also maybe a little bit pessimistic. But there may be startups that are excited to take on that challenge. It's a $2 trillion, $2.5 trillion. I don't even know anymore how large that industry is. There's certainly an opportunity where savings could be generated in such a way to make that a huge payoff. Like if there was a generative AI that could take some of the more current transparency and healthcare billing laws that have come up in the last couple of years to actually give us an answer of what that's supposed to look like, it would be so wonderful.
I feel like AI is like kind of nipping at small bits of the problem in the back office. Anytime I hear like a master data anything, I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. It's like a tar pit problem, this like having a master data solution.
So that's the problem is I have the same opinion.
Right.
But that's
Hopefully we're
wrong.
wrong.
Exactly. We need to be curious,
Right.
not judgmental. I'll never forget, in 1992, I had a friend that was telling me about this cool new thing. You only had to pay like $25 or $30 a month, and you could send an electronic message to somebody else that was on that. And at the time, I had internal email from the company that I worked for, and I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. No one's going to pay $25 or $30 a month for a service like that. This is dumb. Lee Group, one of my favorite people, I still admire him today because he was telling me about America Online and basically painting the picture of a pay-for internet service model that, like $30 a month, please take my money. Like, that's nothing. So maybe I'm not the right guy to always bring, cutting edge technology to. My only other mentor in that space is, you go through life in stages. One of my friends, and still one of my best mentors, Bob, he had his daughter about 6 months before I had mine. We were chatting, and he was like, man, if there was just some way we could take all these pictures of our kids and put them somewhere that, our family could log in and look at them, that would be so cool. I'm like, dude, just, start a web page and post pictures. That's not hard. That's not a problem. Just, you're just being lazy. And then 2 years later, there's this thing called Facebook, and it's just so again, sometimes people identify things before I do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea of technology, is there are a lot of these tar pit problems that are just not possible, and then at some point in time, something enables that, and then you have all these startups that pop up to take advantage of the opportunity. So maybe that's coming in the future.
It is. I mean, think about the changes that have occurred in your own lifetimes. But I also go back to that company, Electronic Data Systems, where we still have COBOL software in production today, written that long ago. And if I wrote it, it's not very good.
I haven't heard the word COBOL in years.
Well, there you
go. Okay, let's talk about some personal
Excuse
stuff.
me, 800 million lines of COBOL programming software still in production today. 800 million. Yeah.
So you wrote 1 million of that? How many?
Easily. At this point, I'm going to go with 8.
8
lines of code. Yeah, it's probably comments.
So those have been long deleted.
Huh?
Have you heard of the COBOL Cowboys?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, it's a band. They were on the news a while back. It's a band of older developers that know COBOL that basically get hired up by all the government agencies that are still using COBOL.
So.
And they're one of the few, actual production writers of COBOL.
Oh my God, you got to join them, Richard.
So.
I think they're in Texas somewhere.
Wow.
It would make sense.
Are you a COBOL cowboy, Conrad? Somehow, magically? What are you and what do you think CIOs in general are going to be budgeting for next year? Like, what are you investing in next year? What are you spending money on next year? What are those big 1 or 2 things?
So for me, my budget is always going to be what can we do to make ourselves better? And the way we do that is we will bring in consultants to identify gaps, come up with a plan of action to fill those gaps, and make sure that we're delivering on our component of the IT service that we need to do for our companies to deliver the services that they can.
Do you budget for the consulting part? Like, do you know ahead of time that I'm going to need X amount of dollars for consultants to come in to solve some kind of problems, or does it just happen for you?
Some of it happens. Some of it happens as a call to action. And it's different everywhere else. The company I came from, it's so funny. They were fantastic at budgeting, and planning business as usual. They had laid out a course of action, a budget for their upcoming year, and then they got a whale client. And that whale client required that they go from internal systems that they house themselves in their own data warehouse to cloud. Several $1 million later of unplanned, unbudgeted activity, they were 100% in the cloud. I'm very proud of it. It's amazing what they did. But I remember we talked about it for years, and it just seemed like it was going to be an infinite journey. And as an organization, this company is so well run. They really do, I think, a fantastic job of planning what they want to do. But sometimes you just got to roll with the punches.
Yeah.
If you weren't CIO, if you weren't in this industry, what would you be doing?
My natural proclivity would be to be an individual performer and I am a pretty good database engineer. So
I thought you were saying like a rock star.
I thought you meant like a
Database
circus, like in the circus or something.
well, if I had made it to that 6'11", 7 foot tall range, I certainly would have gone to NBA basketball, of course.
Oh yeah, you played basketball in college.
I played a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I really like what I do, so it's hard for me to imagine not doing it.
I got one last question.
All right.
It's a very dumb question.
There's no
I'm
such
sure.
thing. There's no dumb questions.
But you keep talking about databases, and that's like your expertise, you
Mm-hmm.
know, in that field. Are we ever gonna not have databases?
Relational databases, the concept of relational database will never quite die because it's very efficient.
Right.
But building and extracting those relationships from unstructured data is absolutely going to occur.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into the role of CIO, your background.
Part of the reason to become a CIO is just longevity, right? If you stay around long enough, you'll eventually migrate towards a leadership position. They get rid of everybody else, I guess. I graduated from college in 1988 with a degree in biology and a minor in chemistry. And thankfully, there was no barrier to entry for information technology back then. Started out my career with a company named Electronic Data Systems. But I got a bit of an entrepreneurial bug a little bit later in my 20s, and I went to go work at a small company that was an apparel manufacturer, textiles, with factories all over Latin America. They were based in Miami. So I built systems there. I helped them grow their business, and I focused on the areas where we could be really, nowadays it would be called operational efficiency or digitization. I took the technical components and the knowledge that I gained from that job, and I started a consulting practice working directly with Latin American manufacturers to provide them a kind of a U.S. footprint into the shipping and logistics. And I started a business where I would do shipping and logistics out of Miami. I had a warehouse, with about 40 employees, doing the actual physical labor, and then our value add was to sell the software consulting practices on top of that. About a year into that, I realized that the only person making money was our landlord. So we eventually decided to make the decision to terminate the warehousing service side of it and focus only on the software. And I did that for about 8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years of running your business. What would you say maybe was one of the most important things you learned?
I learned how to step out of my technical role very quickly and focus on the business side of, number one is just making sure you get paid. Like, that's the craziest thing, right? Like, there is a business process of invoicing and making sure your clients are paying on time and actually demanding that you get paid for your services. And that's such a silly thing that a lot of engineers sometimes will forget.
Sure.
That there's an administrative component to running a business that supersedes the actual value of the service that you're doing. I was my HR department. I was my accounting and receivable department. I was my social media, even though there was no such thing as real social media. And so I had to learn those other skills in that job, and I really gained an appreciation for just how challenging it is for a company to build those things successfully.
What did you do after that?
So, I got to a point where I was in my 40s, and you have that, or at least I did, an epiphany that the peer group that I was swimming with wasn't going to allow me to achieve what I wanted to do on my own. I could no longer be all things to all people as a consultant. At that point, I had already gone through the cycle of bringing people in, mentoring, training, and then celebrating, partially celebrating as they leave, and, because I could no longer afford to pay them. And I saw that cycle was kind of going to repeat itself into the future. And I needed to surround myself with other folks that could help me achieve, some of the personal things that I wanted. Like, I wanted to take the skills that I had learned and apply them in a larger setting. And the easiest way for me to do that was to go back in and find a company that would be looking to grow and scale and where I could actually apply my talents. So I actually sought out an opportunity, and I was very selective. It took me about a year and a half, and I found a right company They had been in business for about 15 years, and they were on that journey of going from a good company to a great company. And so I joined them as their director of IT and IT manager, and I'm very proud of my tenure there. We were able to do some things that I think were very successful, so much so that the company got acquired and the owners got the return on investment that they were looking for. So it was a great experience.
How did you end up here?
The timing was right. My company was acquired, and I mentioned to my friend that I might be looking for a position. And he's like, well, I might have one for you. And next thing I know, I was here in Dallas, CIO, and there was 6 affiliated companies underneath that umbrella, and it's been a fire hose ever since. It's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Is there anywhere people can find you or learn more about you?
Sure, absolutely. I am on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much.
All right.